search or scan between all the data of the Excel. So whenever you're going to scan between all the data of the Excel, you're going to go ahead and use a for each row in data table, and you're going to go ahead either loop through all the data, or you will go ahead and create a nested loop and then create like for each inside of for each, and you will go ahead and start searching for your data or start repeating your particular your repetitive action for all the data that you have. Now imagine this particular requirement where my example that I'm going to have is I have a number 1 that is available in the first sheet, and I have another workbook which has got number 2 information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare these two information from two different sheets or two different workbook, and I'm going to go ahead and see which is lesser than what is the information, right? So I have created, just for understanding purposes, I have just put everything into one single data so that we can first understand the manual steps. So assuming this is my workbook 1 and this is going to be my sheet 1, and this is going to be my workbook 2 and this is going to be my sheet 1. So what is the information? Now I want to compare this and this information, and I want to say whichever is lesser or greater than the individual numbers. So how will I achieve this? So far we were doing only scanning across all the data. So we were scanning this, or we were taking this and we were searching everywhere. But in this particular case, we are not going to scan across the entire data. We are aware of the location of the data. So when you know this is my exact location, I want to compare with this particular location. So these type of scenarios, you are going to not use the for loop. The for loop is going to be for all the information or for all the rows that is available or for all the data that is available. But here we are not going to use the for loop. We are going to, since we know the exact location, we are going to directly fetch the exact location from the data table as such. So how will I fetch it directly from the data table? So basically when I say I can fetch it directly from data table, it's going to be like I will go ahead and give the exact location using the rows and the column information. So how can I go and fetch the information directly from the data table? So now imagine this is my Excel sheet. So how am I going to, first I'll write down the manual steps. So basically I need to open the Excel sheet. So this is going to be open Excel, or if you do not have an open Excel, you go ahead and do to read range. So this is going to be converted into DT1 and this is going to be converted into DT2, right? So once you have read the information, now the next information we are going to do is we are going to take this information and compare it with this information. So how can I take this particular information? I can take it directly from the data table. So assuming this is my data table, so this I'm going to put it as, the data table DT1. So this is going to be workbook 1, sheet 1, right? So similarly, I'm going to copy this particular information. So this is my row and column information. And we have, starting from the 0th row, you're going to go on as such, right? So this is your row information. And here again, we are going to start from the 0th column. So this is going to be your information that you might be having. Say, suppose you're having it like this. So the similar information we are going to copy it there also. So we are going to do a similar kind of a data table that we will create it here also. So this is going to be for DT2. That is going to be the workbook 2, sheet 1, and whatever is the data that we have. So we have got this particular data, right? So this is our output that I want to generate. So assuming this is my output. So how am I going to understand this particular criteria? I'm going to make sure that this particular information is going to be first spoken in terms of the data table. So when I say spoken in terms of the data table, how am I going to take it? So first let's consider what are we going to compare. So we know what we are going to compare. We are going to compare this particular location from the data table to this particular location of the other data table. So when I say these two are the locations, obviously I'm going to keep comparing the whatever, the 0th row or the 0th column with the 0th row and the 0th column. So similarly, when I come here, I'm going to take the first row and the 0th column, and similarly the first row and the 0th column. So I should be easy to go ahead and take the information directly from the data table. So how can I take the information directly from the data table? You can take it as dt1 dot rows of the row index followed by the column index. So this should give you the direct information of what is the data. So similarly, if you want to take it here, you're going to give the same thing followed where you will give the dt name as dt2. So here what is going to happen? You're going to go ahead and you're going to understand that this particular information is going to be like, right? So this is the information that you will be seeing. So you're going to take, so when I give this particular information, I am just going to replace the row index or replace the column index. So if I need to fetch this, I will be putting it as 0, 1. If I need this particular location, I'll be putting it as 1, 1, right? So I'm going to take these two information and I'm going to make the comparison. So which means for the first information, I'm going to compare, like, let me put it here. So for the first information, so whenever there's a comparison, you have to see whether it is a greater than or a smaller than, right? So always a comparison or a condition check is going to be through a if statement. So if whatever is your information that you're going to do, if dt1 dot rows of the first information, so it is row index of 0, the column index of 0 is greater than the second dt dot rows of the row index followed by the column index. So what would this actually compare? This will compare 10 with 20. So now your result set is going to be 10 comparison with 20. So similarly, when you take the next time, you're going to, so this is going to be my if statement. Consider this is my if. The first condition is going to be this one. So similarly, my second condition is going to be, I will do the same thing with, I'm here, everything remains in column 0, right? So I need not change the column index. I just need to go ahead and change the row index alone. So this is going to be 1 and this is also going to be 1. So now my information is going to be, I'm going to take the information like this will be compared with 20 is greater than 15 or not. So similarly, I'm going to do the same thing for all the information. So when I say for all the information, I'm going to do it for 5 rows, right? So this is going to be row of 2. This is going to be row of 3. So this is also going to be row of 4. So corresponding the values are going to change. So this is going to be 10 and this is going to be 36. This is going to be 100 and this is going to be 70. And similarly 60 and 55. So this is a comparison that we are going to do. So based on if it is true or false, so based on this, you are going to write if it is true, you are going to say number 1 is greater than number 2. Or if it is a false section, you are going to say no, number 1 is less than number 2. So everywhere you are going to do the same thing, right? So this is the information that you might be doing everywhere for all the information, right? So this is what you're going to do. So here the simplest thing that you can do is, okay, you are going to check for 5 times, you're going to check the 5 conditions and you might be putting it. But here what is going to happen? What is the simple information that we have? Instead of putting 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or say suppose you are doing this. So you have to make sure when you have to stop, I have to make my code generically working for how many ever data I have, right? This particular code will be working only for 5 sets of data. If beyond 5, if I have another information, this particular code will not work for the 6th data or for the 5th data or whatever data that is beyond this. So in order for me to make it generic, I'm going to make sure I note the difference here, and the difference that I note here is only the row index. So if you see, there is only the row index that is keeping on changing. Other than that, the rest of the information remains different. So can I introduce another variable called int row count and keep incrementing that just as we do the Excel count. So what I'll say, I'll initiate the int row count is equal to 0. So I will replace this particular information to int recount. So the entire code will be now replaced to int row count, and it will be working on for every information. So I need not have the entire information. So I can just copy this entire information and I can. So this is not the step I might be doing. I might simply be doing wherever I have the int row count, I'm going to go ahead and do this information. So I'm going to say instead of int row count, sorry, instead of 0th index, I will be putting it as int row count. So what will happen? Wherever 0 is going to be there, it is going to be changed to int row count, where you can go ahead and increment your row count after every step. So this is going to be true or false the same way. So you mention it as true or false, and after that you are going to say when whatever happens, you are going to increment the int row count is equal to int row count plus 1. So what happens the next time you are going to come in, you are going to have this information incremented. Okay, so this is one way of doing, so that this particular code will work for entire set of data, right? How many ever data you pass, it is going to be working. But imagine it is going to work, but how will I know until when I have to stop it? So that's where you're going to introduce the information called, you're going to do the same thing in loop. Okay, so what will be the loop that you're going to introduce? You cannot introduce your for each, because you're not doing it for all the data. You're just doing this comparison to this. So for specified sets of data, you're not going to use for each, you're going to use a while loop. So what I'm going to introduce is, I'm going to introduce a while loop here, and I'm going to do if int row count is less than the total number of rows of the data table. So if I say dt, any dt, because both the data table has got the same information. So dt dot rows dot count. So what will happen? This particular information will be going on until the row count is increased until say 7. Suppose the row data table dot count is now 4, right? So 0 to 4, which will be 5. So what will happen? It will go until 0. It will check. Then again, it will do the 0th information. Then it will do the first information. Then it will do the second information. Then it will do the third, fourth, and the fifth information. So this is what we are going to do, right? So this is one step of understanding how you do the workbook comparison, right? So wherever you have the information called, when you know the location of the data, so at that time you are going to go ahead and use the while loop and give the direct row index and the column index. Okay, so no more you will be using for each row and take the row column name and then equate it where whatever we did for the previous examples. You might not be doing that, right? So again, similarly, so this is the base of this particular program. So you can use it wherever you have the same functionality, how many ever columns you want to compare, or when you know the location of the column data, you can go ahead and give the column data. You can also, here we have hard coded as 0 for the column index. You can also give int column count is equal to 0, and you can maintain the same variable. Okay, because this is called hard coding, so we're not supposed to do this. So you can go ahead and maintain the same variable name, and you can have int column count. So this is what will be an overall program. But in addition to this, what we will understand is, we will understand one more terminology. So what is the other terminology? We are going to understand what are the difference between the activities that we use in Excel. So the first set of activities that we used were Excel dot read range, right? So Excel dot app activities. So wherever you have Excel related functions, you are going to go ahead and use Excel related activities, right? So here you have one set of activities called Excel. Under system app integration, under Excel, you have a lot of Excel activities. Okay, so there is one set of activities that comes under Excel integration. Okay, so app integrated, and you have a lot of Excel activities. There is another set of Excel activities that will be available under system.workbook. So you go down, there will be system, and there will be file, and there will be workbook. So you will have a limited set of activities that is available for the Excel as well. So what is the difference, and where can we find these information, right? So what is the difference, or where can we use these information? So when I say where can we use these particular information, there's a clear information as to where you can use what kind of activities. So let's see the differences. Okay, so the first set of activities that I will do is under the Excel app integration. So I'll say Excel application scope, or however you want. When your Excel application is, we are using under system or under app integration, right? And another set of activity is going to be under system.workbook. So you have system.workbook, file.workbook.activities. Okay, so when you have two different activities as such, so what will be the difference when you're using which activity, right? So we'll see what is a basic difference. So when I say what is a basic difference, you will be allowed to use any kind of activities, but based on your project requirement, you can go ahead and install. You can use any particular any one of the particular activities that is available. So what is the first difference? The first difference is going to be this particular information is going to be, when you're using these set of activities, then you're going to use the activities that is going to be on the different kind of Excel files, which means a .xls file and a .xlsx file, and it also works on XLSM files, which means all macro enabled files. So you can use Excel app integration activities under even a .xlsm file. So which means it is going to be working on macro enabled files. Okay. So this particular method is going to be a little comparatively, it is going to be a little slow, as well it can be used only on XLS or XLSX file. So this is the first difference. So when you have the particular information, suppose you're working on a macro enabled file, then you cannot use any system.workbook related activities. So you need to go ahead and use only the Excel app integrated information, right? And again, when you're using the second set of information, so what is the, when you're using these set of activities which is under the app integration, you need to make sure Excel is installed in your system. If Excel is not installed in your system, then these particular activities will not work. Okay, so Excel should be installed in your system, but here installation is not required. For example, when you are working on a particular, you are deploying on a particular server or particular mission where the Excel is not required, Excel is not installed, right? So on those particular missions, you can go ahead and start using this particular workbook.activities. So which means this will have the basic set of operations that is actually limited to basic uses like read range or write range and things like that. So you may not be able to, or you may not be allowed to use many complex activities that you use in the Excel application scope. So that is the limitation. If the workbook, if the Excel is still not installed in your system, still a system.workbook or activities will be allowed to be used. It will still allow you to start with using your system.workbook.activities, right? And all the graphical representation or the graphical content. So what are the graphical content? So all this information like your charts, like your other information like your pie diagrams and everything. So those kind of information are allowed to be used. Yes, for graphical content. So the Excel application scope or the app integration activities allows you to work on any graphical any graphical interface that is available. So you can work on charts and diagrams. Okay, but here it is not applicable. You cannot work on Excel or any diagram related, you cannot access, there is no access to charts or diagrams. So if your particular information or your particular Excel sheet has a particular graphical representation, then you cannot use a system.workbook activities. You are supposed to use only Excel application scope, right? And another big difference is that always you need to have your Excel application closed when you need to, when you when you run your UiPath Studio and this is using, there will be an automatic message which will say close your Excel application. When you're using workbook.activities, it will say close, the file is in use by another process, so please close the file. So it does not allow the workbook or the sheet should be closed. Okay, if it is not closed, you cannot work on this particular activities, or you cannot use the particular activities. Here the Excel sheet need not be closed. So here even though the Excel sheet is still open, it will allow, it will still work, and it will go and make the updates, save and do everything. Okay, because Excel is already installed, so you're not bothered about anything. By in case your Excel is installed and you have the file open, it will not allow you to do. Okay, so this particular workbook.activities will work whether it is Excel installed or not. This particular activity will work only if Excel is installed. And the last information that we have, or the difference that we have, is password protection. So password protection or password protected sheets may not work in your Excel.activities, which is your app integrated activities, not at all times. Whereas password protection works perfectly where the user will be allowed to enter the username or the password, I mean the password that is there available for the particular information or the particular sheet, right? So these are the main differences. So according to your project requirement, if your project has a macro enabled file and you need to work on a macro enabled file, be good to use the, go ahead and use the Excel related, the app integration related Excel activities. If you do not work on, you're not working on power diagrams and it is going to be password protected, then go ahead and use these set of activities. So based on your project requirement, you are going to go ahead and use the corresponding activity, right? So back to our example. So now we'll go ahead. So we said we are going to go ahead and use a while loop and execute this particular information, right? So let's go ahead and execute this particular information using the, this particular method of executing, right? So let's go to our program. So let me start writing my code. So initially I'm going to draw a chart. I'm going to bring in a flow chart, right? So here I'm going to do two read ranges. So basically I'm going to read WB1, which is my first sheet, and then WB2, right? So I'm going to go ahead and read WB1, so which is going to be a read range. But which read range I'm going to use? I'm going to use system.workbook. You can use anything, but I am using read range as like this. So read range. So I'm going to read workbook 1, and this is between the range, whatever range you want, right? And I'm going to create a output. I'm going to store this into a data table. So I'm going to create a data table called DT1. So automatically there's a data table that gets created. Similarly, another read range for my data table 2. So again, go and refer your workbook 2. So this is again in sheet 1. Control K, DT2. So I have two data tables created, right? So now I'm going to go ahead and start fetching the values. So I'm going to introduce a while loop, or let me put a message box which says data table read finished, DT read complete, right? So now we are going back to our while loop. So in our while, we are going to go ahead and bring the information like, right? So what is the condition that we are going to check? So first of all, we'll go ahead and first check the condition. So I'm going to initiate a int row count, right? So int row count. This is going to be an integer variable, and I'm going to start with the int row count. Always the data table row count starts with 0. So this is going to be 0. I'm going to say int row count is less than dt. It could be dt1 or dt2 dot rows dot count. So which means I'm going to do the looping until the data table reaches the end of the data. Okay, so that is what I'm going to do. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to use two assign statements to assign what is the number 1 and what is the number 2. So there are two assign statements which I'll be saying control K number 1, right? So this is going to be number 1, and this is going to be number 2. So both are going to be of integer variables. Let me put it as integer variable type, and this is going to be inside flowchart, right? So what is this? I'm going to take the first data table. So this is going to be data table 1 dot rows of int row count, which is the row index, followed by the column index, right? So I'm taking the first information where int row count will always be 0. So 0 comma 0, right? So the next time I'm going to do here also, I'm going to say number 2 is equal to dt2 dot rows of int row count followed by the column index. So now what is going to happen? Whatever was there in the second sheet will be given here. So now there's a problem here. So let us understand. Okay. So now we are taking it directly from the data table and we are assigning it to an integer, which means we are supposed to change the parameter to an integer. So how will you change the information to an integer? So you're going to put a prefix of cint. So when you put a prefix of cint, automatically the error will be going. So here also I'm going to put a prefix of cint. So cint of the entire data. And there you go. Right? So we've got the number 1 and number 2. Now we are going to compare. So we are going to say compare if the number 1 is greater than number 2. So what is the information I need to write? I need to write it back to the Excel, right? So I'm going to do a write cell. So here also I'm going to use, if I'm using workbook.activities, which means all the Excel related activities need to be in the workbook.activities only, right? So I'm going to use write cell here. So this write cell is going to be in which workbook? So it is going to be in WB2 and I'm going to write it in my B2 location, right? I'm going to write it in B2, right? So here I'll go and write it in B2. So this is going to be B2, but here we cannot write it directly in B2, right? So we have to again initiate a Excel counter to dynamically increment the variable, dynamically increment the Excel writing as well, right? So this is going to be Excel count. This is going to be integer. This also goes through the, so what is the information? I'm going to start it at B2. So which means this will be 2. So I'm going to say this is going to be concatenate int Excel counter dot toString, right? So what am I going to write? I'm going to write number 1 is greater than number 2. So let me give the parameters also as to what is a number 1. So I will close the quotes, double concatenate, and I'm going to say number 1 dot toString. So here also I'll say number 2 dot toString, right? So the same thing, if it is false, I'm going to go ahead and say it is false. So this is number 1 is lesser than number 2. Right? So we have done with the writing back, right? So after that, what are we supposed to do? We have to increment the row number and the Excel count number. So after so we are in our while loop. So after our if statement, we are going to go ahead and execute. So let me collapse this. Yeah. So let me collapse this and I'm going to increment both the numbers. So this is going to be int row count is equal to int row count plus 1. And another assign statement to say to increment the int Excel counter. So now what did I do? I just went ahead. I read the 2 Excel sheets. I used a while loop to say this needs to be doing, these particular actions need to be repeated until we reach the end of the data. So to mention that particular information only, I am putting it here. So int row count is less than the data table dot rows dot count, which means int row count will start with 0. It will go with the 0th information, pick the information, do the comparison, write back. Again, it will be upgraded to 1. Right? So once it is upgraded to 1, this will also change to 3 now. Again, it will go check the condition. Yes, 2 is less than 5. Correct. So go inside. So what will happen? This particular information will keep on be completing. So let me go ahead and put the same thing. So let me put a message box to say the information has been completed. Right? So let me go ahead and close the workbooks. So we are still having this particular example sheet. So let me go ahead and start executing the program. So the data table read is complete, and now it has all processed all the 5 data. Now it is complete. So let me open this particular information and see what is the content. So let me copy this and come back to this particular data so that we can compare. So is it yes? So 10 is less than 20. Yes, 20 is greater than 15. So 10 is lesser than 36. 100 is greater than 70. And similarly, 60 is greater than 55. So this is how you will do the comparison when you know the location. So you always use the data table dot row index and the column index, and you cannot use this inside a for each also. So this is supposed to be used only outside a loop or outside the for loop. Okay, when you know the content. In a for loop, you already having only one particular data as an active row, right? So you cannot use this particular. You're not supposed to, as a best practice, you're not supposed to use this particular information inside a for each, right?